Undercover boss orders breakfast at his own restaurant. Freezes when waitress complains about tips. It was 6:45 a.m. when the man in the faded hoodie and jeans stepped into the bustling downtown diner. The scent of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air, mingling with the soft hum of early morning chatter. He chose a corner booth, his face partially obscured by a baseball cap, and began to observe. The waitress, a woman in her late 20s with tired eyes and a forced smile, approached with a notepad in hand. "Morning, Han. What can I get you?" "Just coffee and the breakfast special, please," he replied, his voice low. As she turned to place the order, he noticed a slight limp in her step and the way she rubbed her temples when she thought no one was watching. Over the next hour, he watched her juggle multiple tables, handle a rude customer with grace, and assist a new trainee, all while maintaining that same strained smile. When she returned with his check, he handed her a generous tip. Her eyes widened and she whispered, "Thank you. You have no idea how much this helps." He nodded, then asked, "Do you mind if I ask, how are the tips here generally?" She hesitated, then sighed. "Honestly, management takes a cut. They say it's for processing fees and uniform costs, but it feels like we're being shortchanged." The man froze. This was his restaurant. He was the CEO of the chain, conducting an undercover visit to understand the day-to-day operations. The policy she mentioned was news to him. Over the next few days, he visited several other locations, hearing similar stories. Employees felt undervalued, overworked, and underpaid. The culture he thought he had cultivated was eroding. Determined to make things right, he called a company-wide meeting. Standing before his employees, he removed his cap and revealed his identity. Gasps echoed through the room. "I've seen firsthand the challenges you face," he began, "and I promise changes are coming." But as he delved deeper into the company's finances, he discovered discrepancies, large sums unaccounted for, unauthorized expenses, and a trail leading to someone he trusted implicitly. He hadn't said a word, not when she ranted, not when she confessed that half the staff was barely surviving, not even when she scoffed and said the owner had probably never worked a single shift in his life. Thomas Clay just sat there, the edge of his coffee cup trembling slightly in his fingers. The smell of frying bacon hung thick in the air. His breakfast had gone cold. Her name tag read Erin. But in that moment, she was more than that. She was every overworked server, every tired voice that had gone unheard in the system he built. And she was speaking the kind of truth no boardroom report could ever show. He looked up slowly, locking eyes with the cook behind the window, Jorge, who looked back with that same expression from years ago. Weariness. But behind that, something else. Recognition. The man gave a slight nod, barely noticeable, and turned back to the grill. Thomas knew he'd been made. He stood. Erin flinched. She thought he was about to complain. About the coffee. About her attitude. About something. He reached into his pocket and laid down a black Amex and a worn, folded photo. Her eyes darted from the card to the picture. It was an old shot, a younger version of her standing next to her mother, smiling outside the same restaurant. The building still had its original sign back then. Her hand went to her mouth. That picture had only ever hung behind the counter. She looked up, stunned. "Where did you get?" "I took it," Thomas said, "the day I opened this place." Her voice caught in her throat. I'm the owner," he said quietly. The man who was too busy to come back. Until now. Silence dropped between them like glass shattering. The other waitress froze at the register. Jorge stopped flipping eggs. A customer 2 booths down turned his head, confused. Erin took a step back. Sir, I mean..." "No," Thomas cut in. "You did, and you should have." The words weren't angry. They weren't performative. They were heavy. Real. He walked past her toward the kitchen, through the door without asking. No one stopped him. The back room hadn't changed. Same scuff tiles. Same steam streak walls. Same back exit propped open with a milk crate. Jorge met him halfway. "You remembered," Thomas said. "Hard to forget the man who handed me my first paycheck." Jorge replied, "I thought it was you. You always tap the sugar packets like that." Thomas gave a half laugh. "I'm predictable, huh?" "No," Jorge said. "You're late." That hit harder than any accusation. Thomas looked around the kitchen. It was running, but barely. Old equipment, burned out lights, a schedule pinned with thumbtacks, curling from the edges. His empire had grown while this place had decayed. "I need the truth," Thomas said. Jorge didn't hesitate. Tips get skimmed. Managers pocketing cash. Aaron's been covering split shifts for people who got let go when hours were cut. Corporate sends new rules, but they don't show up when we report broken stuff. Last inspection we passed because I fixed the fridge myself. Thomas swallowed. "Why didn't anyone report this?" "They did," Jorge said. "But people like us, we don't get past the gatekeepers. We don't have your cell number." Thomas nodded slowly. 100 thoughts spun through his head. HR procedures, internal audits, his executive VP who assured him all was running smoothly. He suddenly remembered the monthly reports. Always neat, always clean. Too clean. A door creaked open. Erin stepped into the kitchen, her apron half untied. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I didn't know it was you. I didn't mean to." "You don't need to apologize," Thomas said. "You need to help me fix it." She blinked. "Fix what?" "All of it," he said. "I want to know everything. Who's taking what? Who's hurting? Who's helping? And who forgot why we started this?" Erin hesitated. "You sure?" Thomas looked around. Then at her. "I'm very sure. Over the next 24 hours, everything changed." Thomas didn't leave the restaurant. He sat through every shift, not in a suit, not with an assistant, but as a man trying to listen. Erin opened her phone and showed him texts from the assistant manager, who laughed off her concerns. Jorge brought out the envelope of cash he'd used to secretly tip busboys whose hours were cut. A dishwasher named Corey quietly revealed he'd been sleeping in his car out back since his rent went up. Thomas asked them not to hold back. They didn't. When the morning sun broke through the dusty windows again, Thomas made a call to his driver, not to pick him up, but to bring something, his old laptop, a company-issued one that still had unrestricted internal access. Within the next 3 hours, every camera feed from every location under his company's umbrella was reviewed. Every manager flagged for suspicious deductions had their logs pulled. Emails were audited. Payroll anomalies exposed. And it all started because one waitress complained over cold coffee. He called an emergency leadership meeting, not at corporate, at the restaurant. When the regional director walked in, flanked by the assistant manager and 2 HR reps, they were laughing. Erin stood near the counter, her arms crossed. Jorge stood beside her. The others were in the kitchen, watching through the past window. Then they saw him. "Thomas." Silence. "Good morning," he said. "Take a seat." The regional director stammered. "Sir, we weren't expecting." "I know," Thomas said. "That's the problem." He laid out printouts, screenshots, testimonies, legal memos. When he got to the section about Corey sleeping in the alley, his voice cracked. He didn't hide it. No one spoke. The air was thick with a kind of shame too big to fake. Then he turned to the assistant manager. "Do you remember texting this to Erin?" He read it aloud. "If you don't like it, quit. Nobody cares about tip pooling. Corporate doesn't read these reports anyway." The man's face went pale. "You were wrong," Thomas said. "I read them. Every single one. Last night." Erin's eyes welled, but she didn't blink. "You're terminated," Thomas said to the assistant manager, effective immediately. The regional director started to speak, but Thomas raised a hand. "And you're on unpaid leave pending investigation. You approve the schedule changes. You ignore the complaints. You build a wall between us and the people who trusted us." They left, quiet, No arguments, just the creak of the door. Thomas turned back to the staff. "I built this company on 3 promises," he said. "Respect, dignity, and fairness. Somewhere along the line, those got replaced by metrics and margins. I let it happen, but no more." He paused, looked around the faces. "We're rebuilding, and I need your help." Over the next 6 weeks, Thomas rolled out a sweeping policy reform. Tip transparency was made mandatory. Emergency housing support was initiated for at-risk employees. Managers were retrained. Anonymous whistleblower systems were installed. And most powerfully, Thomas created a rotating employee board, elected by the staff, to review local decisions and report directly to him. The restaurant where it started, it became the new pilot flagship, renovated, respected, reborn. And Erin, she didn't ask for it, but Thomas handed her a letter one morning with her paycheck. It was a formal promotion. Regional training supervisor. Same pay as mid-level managers. Benefits. Control over her own schedule. She stared at it like it might disappear if she breathed too hard. "I said I wanted your help," Thomas said. "I meant it." She folded the paper. "Okay," she said. "Then let's make sure no one gets ignored again." The media picked it up. Quietly at first. A leak story here. A post from a viral Reddit thread there. Then it hit a national morning show. Undercover boss turns cold breakfast into national policy reform. They wanted interviews. Thomas declined most. Erin declined all. "Not about fame," she said. "It's about doing better." But one morning, she did agree to speak. Not on TV. At a local high school career day. She stood in front of a classroom filled with kids in plastic chairs, looking like they hadn't decided if they cared yet. She told them everything. The burned-out mornings. The rude customers. The moment she saw the owner sitting alone with his hood up. And how that moment taught her that sometimes a person with the power isn't loud or polished or expected. Sometimes they're the ones you almost walk past. And maybe, just maybe, you are too. As she spoke, a teacher watched from the back, his face unreadable. When she finished, he stood, applauded, and said 5 words she would never forget. "Thank you for telling them." Because telling the truth, she realized, isn't just about justice. It's about prevention. The restaurant remained busy, not because of marketing, but because word got out. This place treated people like people. Jorge still flipped eggs. Corey got an apartment. Erin bought a used car and finally stopped taking 2 buses to get to work. And Thomas? He came in every Sunday. Same seat, same booth, never alone. Sometimes he'd bring his laptop, other times a notepad, but he always left a tip and a note to remind the staff they mattered, to remind himself what listening really looked like. And every so often when a new trainee got hired, they'd be told the story of the man who wore a hoodie, sat alone, and changed everything. Because in a world where so many climb ladders by stepping over others, one boss chose to sit down and listen. And in that silence, everything shifted. If this story reminded you that dignity should never be earned, only recognized, then don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Speak up for those who can't. And if you ever find yourself on the other side of the counter, remember this story before you speak. Subscribe for more real, human stories that make a difference. Because sometimes the person you're overlooking is the one who's been watching all along.